yeah, thank everyone for coming. Thank you for coming tonight. As she explained, I pulled the lever for Barack Obama, and about 5 minutes later said, "Wait, I don't know any black people." And then I started asking all my white friends here in New York, "How many black people do you know?" And they're like, two was the highest answer I got. So I thought that by going back and backtracking through my own life, my high school, my workplace in advertising, neighborhoods I lived in, and figuring out why those things were still lily white 40 years after the civil rights movement, that might provide some answers as to where we took a left turn after Martin Luther King died when we tried to integrate. I was going to read from the real estate section, from the end of the real estate section where I profiled an integrated neighborhood, different but similar to Fort Greene in Kansas City, to read about all the uncomfortable black and white people living together in 2008 because I thought, that might resonate. But there was too much backstory to fill in to explain how they got there, so that really wasn't going to work. So I figured I'd start at the beginning, which is from where I went to high school, which was Vestavia Hills is a small suburb of Birmingham, Alabama, and it is sort of the most defiantly white suburb of Birmingham. Our school mascot was the Confederate Rebel. We had the Confederate flag was our official school flag. I have a Confederate flag on my high school diploma, which my wife will not let me put on the wall for many reasons. So I went back. That was the first place I went when I started researching the book, and we had school busing that was of mild effectiveness, you could say. And the first thing I did when I went back was to get on the bus because the busing program is still in place there. And I went to the principal and I said, "Would you let me ride the bus out to Oxmoor and back?" Because that's the black community that buses into Vestavia Hills. And they said, "Sure, go ahead." And I met this rather incredible woman named Alicia Thomas, who not only drove the bus, but was one of the first students to ride it back in the 1970s. And her story was a pretty amazing one, and she was very generous and sweet and took me along for this ride. And so this is the story of that ride from the first part of the book, which is entitled Letter from a Birmingham Suburb. It's way too early. The sun is barely up, it's cold out, and Alicia Thomas is warming up the engine of her big yellow school bus. She cranks the heat for her two boys, Robert and Walter, who sit a few rows back. Still bundled up in winter coats to stave off the February chill, they're pulling out their school books to get in some last-minute studying before homeroom. Up in the front row, I reach over and hand Miss Alicia, as all the kids call her, the warm cup of coffee I'd promised when she invited me along for the ride. She says thank you with a sweet, sunny Alabama smile, which seems impossibly bright given the hour. We idle a few minutes while she double-checks some gauges, then she puts the bus in gear, and we're off. Alicia Thomas drives the bus, not the regular bus, and not the short bus. She drives the other bus, the bus that brings the black kids. Every weekday morning for nearly 4 decades, her bus, or a bus quite like it, has followed the same well-worn route, out from the suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama, along Highway 31, up Columbiana Road, down the far side of Shades Mountain, and out into the Oxmoor Valley below. There, in Oxmoor, the bus picks up its quota of federally mandated integration and hauls it back to the leafy, lily-white enclave where I went to high school, Vestavia Hills. It's a route Miss Alicia could probably navigate blindfolded. In the early 1970s, long before she drove the bus, she rode it as a student. It used to get so cold, she says with a shiver, remembering her mornings at the stop. The boys had to light campfires to keep us warm until the bus came. "You had campfires," I say, "at your bus stop?" "Oh, yeah," she says. "We were so country." Less than 10 miles from the million-dollar cul-de-sacs of Vestavia Hills, the Oxmoor where Alicia Thomas grew up was little more than a rambling crisscross of back roads at the outskirts of nowhere. Not a town at all, really. There were a few ranch-style brick houses for those who could afford them, but clapboard cinder block shacks were more the norm, some with dirt floors, others with no running water. There wasn't much else to see in the sprawling 7,000 acres of the Oxmoor Valley. It was a scrapyard, a garbage dump for the industrial waste of the U.S. Steel Corporation, which at one time held a monopoly on Birmingham's steel trade. Back then, the Oxmoor kids had to be up at 5 a.m., Alicia says, to walk through fields of chickens and cows, some of them upwards of a mile, just to reach the bus stop. In her day, the bus they rode was a rickety scrap metal clunker, lurching around the hairpin turns of the city's mountainous terrain. Their bus driver? Some old white guy clutching the wheel, half scared to death by all the rowdy black children crammed in behind him. I can just remember riding down those big hills, Alicia recalls, The brakes going out and the bus packed with kids. It was 3 to a seat with the rest on the floor or standing on the aisle with no air conditioning. And here's this one old white guy driving all these black kids. He couldn't handle all those kids. What was the guy's name? I asked. The question brings her up short. You know, she says, in all those years of driving us, I don't think he ever spoke to us once to tell us his name. We just called him Shaky because he was always so nervous. Shaky, slow down. You gonna kill us. Vestavia Hills sits just south of Birmingham, the largest city in Alabama and at one time the largest industrial center in the South. Together with the neighboring towns of Mountain Brook, Homewood, and Hoover, Vestavia forms the nucleus of Over the Mountain, the catch-all term for Birmingham's suburban sprawl, so named because you go over Red Mountain to get there from downtown. Having lived there, I suppose I can say that whites in Vestavia aren't any more or less racist than the ones in the other suburbs, but when the school system was formed here in 1970, born in the exodus of white flight, the city did go to great lengths to put its feelings on display. Vestavia's chosen mascot was the Confederate rebel, Colonel Reb. An ornery, cartoony-looking fellow, the colonel resembles a cross between Yosemite Sam and an angry Mark Twain, his hat cocked back and a clenched fist sticking out. The official school banner was the Confederate battle flag. Flown from pickup trucks and waving high in the bleachers, the stars and bars was always on proud display. If you stumbled onto a Vestavia football game by accident, you might think you were at a Klan rally with a concession stand. It's true. That's the image Vestavia wanted, and it stuck. To this day, racial incidents land the school on the 5 o'clock news. There are many in Birmingham's black community who still refuse to set foot in, quote, that racist suburb, because to them this isn't just a suburb. As a symbol, Vestavia Hills was nothing more than white flight's parting shot at the civil rights movement, the final insult. Alicia Thomas first arrived here as a 5-year-old kindergartner in 1971. Friends of hers had come the year before, so what she encountered wasn't a complete surprise. Huddled around the bus stop campfire, the stench of the smoke would sink into your clothes. Once you got to school, you'd hear, God, what's that smell? Or those niggers stink as you walk down the hall. For the first several months, Alicia says, she and the black students were all put with a black teacher and had their classes in the corner of the cafeteria, still segregated from the white kids. Even after she was put into regular classes, white teachers didn't treat her fairly. They assumed she was slow, less capable. My 3rd grade teacher was a mean lady, Alicia recalls. I had to say to her, I can read. I can write. One day she told me to get out of her class and go down to the learning lab. I ignored her and just sat there and read my book. I wanted her to know that I could read. It was the same when she went out for the volleyball team in middle school. The coaches told her she couldn't join because the bus kids had to leave at 3:30 and couldn't be counted on to stay for practice. So we didn't even try out, she says. I didn't know they couldn't tell us not to try out for something. And my parents had a car. They could have driven us back after school, but the coaches told us no. And so went Alicia Thomas's time in Vestavia Hills. Still kind of separate, not exactly equal. Yet she looks back on it without regret, even when remembering the worst. I don't feel like I got as much out of the system as the other kids, she says. I don't, but we didn't have anybody fighting for us. My feelings got hurt, but the little stuff I went through, it's nothing. I'm okay with it. I didn't have anything growing up, and Vestavia gave me something I probably wouldn't have had. I know how much it did for me, and I hope I can do the same for my boys. Her sons, the 2 young men diligently doing their schoolwork behind us, are the reason Alicia Thomas is driving the bus today. After graduating from Vestavia, she went to the University of Alabama at Birmingham on scholarship, got married, and settled in the small town of Midfield, just west of downtown. She landed an office job in the personnel department of the Saks Fifth Avenue store at the Galleria. Then, 10 years ago, Saks downsized, and she was let go. While she pondered what to do next, an unlikely job offer floated in from her past. Vestavia Hills needed a new bus driver. Her children were about to start school, and like all parents, she wanted them to get into a good one. She'd long ago moved from the busing zone in Oxmoor, and she couldn't afford to live in Vestavia itself. But every employee of the Vestavia school system, from the principal to the lunch lady, can enroll his or her children for free. I knew Vestavia was the best, she says, so I decided to drive the bus. So here we are. It's the end of the first leg of our bus ride, and we've reached Oxmoor. That's where we'd wait for the campfire, Alicia says, pointing to the corner of Goss Street as we go by. She calls out a few other landmarks from her childhood here and there, but Oxmoor is no longer the place it once was. In just the past few years, this one-time industrial scrapyard has been consumed by suburban sprawl. The old shacks and shanties are still there,